the resources that they're providing, the people, the human resources in particular, helping with the technical stuff, wonderful people, don't hesitate to ask. A lot of the things that they said, kind of trying to gently suggest that we do things, probably should have been in boldface, underline, and flashing red, right? So, pay attention to what they're saying. I can't tell you how many times there were things that if I'd been on my own, and frankly, when I first did this,
we're in Explorer. Do you mind if I go to Firefox?
Yeah, that's fine. Firefox is good. Matter of fact, that's a good example. Firefox works much better with Blackboard, so I recommend to my students, look, use Firefox, right? Don't use anything else, because that's one of the tips I got, right? And so I started using Chrome, and things went sideways. And so if you can, possibly, take good notes when they suggest something and say, this is a good idea. If in doubt, follow their advice.
And I would add, anticipate that your students might not even know what Firefox is. This came up yesterday for me. So they were using something within my course and it said, don't use Chrome or Safari. And my response to them was to use Firefox. And she was like, what do I do? What is that?
Yeah.
So we think they know all about technology. They know this technology. They don't necessarily know stuff that's useful for learning. So be aware of that.
And Stephen will show you, he's done a remarkable job of spelling out some of those kind of more logistical nuts and bolts things that I think has saved him. And these are people, part of why we have people like Stephen and Mark come is because they're teaching hundreds of students. You can imagine if something doesn't work at scale, the kinds of headaches.
So, but just out of curiosity, is there one example that you can give of why or how Firefox is better than Chrome?
It works.
Yeah, it doesn't crash.
I give you lots of examples, but that's the executive summary.
Yeah.
It's the most bulletproof.
Yeah, less questions from students and that sort of thing, right?
I also use a Terra citation software that comes add-on to Firefox.
That's good.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, that's better.
There are definitely things that will not show up in Chrome or Internet Explorer that do show up in Firefox that the students need to see, like turn it in.
Yeah, and it always, those sorts of little glitches will show up at the worst time, like when they're taking their first quiz or whatever online. Murphy's Law says that's when that's going to happen. So there's a couple of things I'd like to get across. That, first of all, the hearing from the other instructors was one of the most valuable things when we started in our group. And feel free to contact me if you have questions or run into things. I found the hard way to do some things and later found easier ways. So in this course, this was a real challenge in that it's an engineering course in which the students had to do things that required numeric input and calculations and equations and circuit diagrams, and I had a lot of challenges, and that was one of the very first things that I asked the whole team about was, how am I going to do this, right? Because if I was teaching something that was amenable to multiple choice, great, but most of everything we do in engineering is not that way. It's numbers, formulas, graphics, things like that. So that's an important thing if you're in that category to plan for. So one of the things that I did was I broke the course, and this was a direct result of their suggestions, into chunks successively. So over on the left there's essentially the key topics that are in the course. And because I'm teaching them binary numbers and stuff, section 0 was the first one, not section 1. And that was on number systems. And for each of it took me a while. It's sort of like, how do you write the abstract or the introduction? Well, you write the body first, then you figure out what needs to be in the introduction and the conclusion. And that's essentially the way I did this, is, kind of went through, I taught the course before. I think whatever you've learned in your regular course, the more you learn how to do this, the more systematic you'll be, even in the live courses. So that's actually one of the big benefits, is that I found what I learned here and how to organize things has translated into less work in my live courses, because I can do a lot more with less of my personal time, and I can give things to TAs and so on, so that I don't necessarily have to spend as much time on these things myself. Broke things down. I had several categories. I had priority 1 items, which basically was the what are you overdue on. I also put the settings in here that if they hadn't logged in a 6-week course, I told them that they had better be prepared to spend a lot of hours in a fairly short period of time, which turned out, when I took the 15-week course and compressed it, about 30 hours per week. And I told them that up front. I said, look, this is a significant, basically, commitment that they're making. And I was kind of hard-nosed about that, and I'm kind of glad I was, because I had also a section, important dates, which was all the due dates when everything was due. So I had the generic, okay, it doesn't, okay, there we go. So I had the university deadlines and key deadlines, and you'll notice there were a couple things I extended by a day or two. But in general, I told them, these are hard dates, you have to have things. And so that was up as of day one. They knew when they had to do what. I also basically chickened out and did a live final exam on campus. A lot of reasons for that, and you'll probably learn some of them later. But the technology, in my opinion, is not quite there yet for me to be confident that students aren't cheating when they're taking a final exam. I did incorporate the ideas that were suggested, such as having a large test bank. So the exams, the quizzes that I put on online, I did have a lot of questions to choose from, and the reason I was able to do that is I found a way to use Excel in spreadsheets to import numeric values and problems from an Excel spreadsheet where I could give them 100 problems and use a random number generator and then just import that all into Blackboard. So I only had to solve that question problem once and then copy and paste into a big spreadsheet and then import it. So, those kinds of things, sort of like the difference between using a hand tool and a power tool. And the good news is you can work fast. The bad news is it's much easier to cut your arm off. So you do have to be careful how you apply them. But that's another reason for having the practice course. So that's what I did. I used the development course. I still use the development course for trying things and seeing how they worked out. That helped a bunch. Another thing that I found was very helpful in doing this, and I'll probably do a little bit different next time, is in making sure that the students are engaged from the very beginning. I wasn't as hard-nosed in the first week, and with a 6-week summer session, it was a lot. That was an awful lot to cram in a very short period of time. And the ones who weren't immediately engaged were problematic, and it was exacerbated by the whole problem of if they're taking the course and they're not officially in the system, if they're open university students, it seems like forever until they're actually in and able to get to Blackboard. Now, in a 15-week session, not a big deal. I mean, I've got that going on right now, but on the other hand, in a 6-week session, 1/6, that's huge, and that's about how long it seemed to take. So one of the things I did was, in addition to having the Blackboard site, I set up external stuff that I had under my own control on another website where I posted duplicates of the same information. So the PDF files and the due dates and the things that they needed for that first week or two of course was available elsewhere. And I actually started them sort of a couple of days before the official course started. So everybody got my email they got my email because they were registered. Anybody that I knew was in the class got an announcement saying, if you can't get to Blackboard, here's the alternate, because otherwise I would have lost 1/6 of the teaching period. So that was something I would recommend that nobody really told me, and having been through it, yeah, it really is kind of painful. There's not much you can do about that, and as far as I understand, there's really no fix because of the way the system works.
If everyone would do that, we'd have half the load of our help desks.
So
that's a lot of work, though. So we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But the state requires that the matriculated students here at SDSU have first dibs. So those extension students and open use students, by law, can't get in. So it gets really weird. But that's something we just have to deal with. So you came up with a creative solution.
Yeah, just whatever you do. I mean, one of the things that I did was create a shared Google Docs folder that I made publicly available and put everything in there, because that was an easy thing to do. I could give them a link and make it open to the public, and then they can get in. They can get all the because I have PDF files and exercises and the first couple of chapters of the book that are available free online, so that even if they took a week to get it from Amazon or whatever, they had that first initial stuff, regardless of whether they could get into Blackboard or not. And then what I did was, once I knew everybody was there, then I started doing the online quizzes. So, for instance, let's see. Let's pick the first one. I have, and I suggest that you have a detailed syllabus and schedule, and I had a syllabus quiz, which is one of the things I learned in this. Syllabus quiz is critical, okay? So, yes, they won't read anything unless there's points attached. They won't do anything unless there's points attached. They're remarkably resourceful at avoiding work. They're also remarkably resourceful at cheating, unfortunately, and that's another topic that we've had some discussions about. But there are things you can do to mitigate the cheating issues by making it hard enough to them that they just, you know, if they have to work harder at cheating than just learning this stuff, then okay, then they'll learn this stuff, right? So, you know, in this case, the first week there was a syllabus quiz and a quiz on the material, and I told them, and I did in fact, throughout all the other quizzes, I had a test bank of quiz questions that were specific to the syllabus, and I said, by the way, you're going to get some random syllabus questions on every quiz you take, including the final exam. And by gosh, they all read it, and I didn't have the usual thing that I have happen all the time, which is, well, when do I, well, it says on the, well, how do I, well, it says on the, you know, that is a major time waster for me and the TAs and stuff too. So that helped a bunch. There were some things that were kind of unique in trying to do an engineering course that we had a hands-on element because the students actually had, this is sort of the first step in learning how to design a chip. And so they had boards that had a chip on them that they could essentially do their own hardware design. And that added an extra dimension of fear on my part because how am I going to accommodate all this? Well, that actually turned out to work out okay. So if you have something that you need, make sure that you get everything lined up in advance so the students can, you know, there's a link to Amazon or something. So that helps a lot if there are supplementary materials that they have to get. Let's see. And then I guess the other thing that I found in doing all this is that the process of going through and putting a course online is exactly the opposite of walking into the class, you know, when the lecture is, and you know, basically shoot from the hip, right? You can't, right? It takes preparation time, and Ken's first rule of projects is it takes longer. Okay, however long you think it is, plan on it taking a lot longer than that and leave yourself time margin. One of the few things I'd say that I made was a good decision was I started my course as a second session in summer rather than the first one. That additional time allowed me to go back and look and sort of be the student and go through these things, and you really have to do that. You know, you want to take the online quizzes yourself to make sure that it is what it's supposed to be. I mean, I found errors, and in fact, that's one of those things where if you do it right up front, it's much less painful than if, as I discovered in midway through one of the quizzes, one of the students emails me and says, Ken, this is the question and the answer, and that can't be right. And I looked and I went, oh, I had the wrong answer for the right question. And so then I had to go back through the quizzes and look and see who got that random question, because there's, you know, 50 questions to choose from, and they were only getting 3 out of the 50. So then I had to go track down, you know, and fix it. So again, the more testing and the more time you spend preparing, the better. But the big advantage is that teaching this live now is way easier. I don't have to spend nearly as much time doing a lot of the stuff that was manual. You know, I don't have to have a TA grading homework. I can give them lots of little teeny quizzes. And that's another recommendation that was made, was to try and make the risk and the complexity of all of the assessments small, and, you know, basically not put them under stress and not put me under stress by having lots of little things and automating them as much as possible, so I didn't have to resolve those kinds of issues that you would if you had to go in and manually grade. So all of my quizzes were such that I didn't have to go back in and look individually at student responses, and that was a major advantage, I'd say, in terms of the amount of time I spent. The other thing was, you know, some of the things that you want to put in there include, you know, you want to make it easy for them to find you. So, like, for each of the categories, I think it's important to have, you know, details. So I had, here's you know, when I'm going to be available, where you can find me. I have a virtual office. Oops. Yeah, So just go back. So basically, I have a virtual office which works pretty nicely. It's a shared screen. They and I both see the same screen. I can put like PowerPoints up, or we can both scribble on the same thing. I got and I can give you the information on this. I found a nice tablet which has a pad of paper on it, hooks up by USB and acts like a digitizing tablet, but you also have a pen that writes with ink on paper. And that I found to be quite useful, because then when I'm working with a student, I can just naturally write on paper, and the same thing can show up on the screen, and I can discuss things with students just as if they were in my office almost. So that helped. I followed the advice too of, whatever the deadline is, make sure it's in a time when you want to be awake, right? So my deadlines were typically like 5 or 6 p.m. And then, I told everybody it was 5 p.m. and I put the actual deadline at 6 p.m. So those who started at 5:59 and 58 seconds would still be able to do the quiz or whatever. I had, my contact info. Oops. So they knew how to get a hold of me, and I use a Google Voice number so that they can send text, but it's not to my direct mobile phone. I can change when it forwards to my phone, so they can't wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's a handy thing. So whatever you do want to share with them, and then when you get to the point where the questions come up, one of the things I did was to tell them, look, there's a certain period of time immediately before an exam or whatever. Don't try and get a hold of me then, because the students will wait until the very end, and then I get a zillion emails and calls and text messages, and I probably should have done that a little bit better earlier. So that's one thing I would suggest is, make it clear to students, if you want to talk to me about material on an exam or whatever, give them enough time so that when they do start flooding in, that you can handle it, and let them know that, hey, you've only got so much capacity. That helped quite a bit by itself, I'd say. Oops, is that it? I guess that's a lot. Okay, and then, what else here? I did have some very specific things. I did set up the discussion boards. I was explicit about what the course accreditation requirements were, and I told them in no uncertain terms. For engineering, it's the ABET, Accreditation Board of Engineering and Technology, and we have in the department specific things. This is what you have to know to get a passing grade in the course. This is what we're promising to the accreditation agencies. And so I literally took that and put it in the class and said, these are the things you have to know. So that actually in some ways made things a little easier for me, because we had that kind of prescribed. Let's see. In terms of the discussion groups, that was pretty good. I think if you have the opportunity to sort of force everybody to get involved in a discussion group up front, I made it a requirement, and they had to post an introduction and answer some questions, because a lot of them will just stay back and not ever post on the group. And so I made that a requirement. And once they kind of get used to it and they see that they can interact with other students, then they'll start actively contributing. And I also gave extra credit for those people who found something that I found was useful in the course for other students. Then I would assign them some extra credit points when they posted something related to the topics in the course. That gave them an opportunity to earn extra credit. And then the ones who were helpful for other students by answering their questions, I decided to give them extra credit too, which motivated the students to answer the others' questions. So that's kind of the quick version. I've got a couple minutes for any questions if you have any. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah, okay.
Big surprises?
That sounds like a cool course. I mean, the way you're running it and all those things you're doing, it really seems great. I'm sorry, you might have said this before. Do we have access to sort of see how you've done this?
Yeah, I mean, we can get a copy available, and I'm sure Andrea can post something. So yeah, I mean, this is the one that just ended, so it's all fresh in my mind. So if you do have questions or you want to see it, now's a good time.
Yeah, I'm assuming that all these sort of you said this probably already. It's like they're open or they, it's just sort of like asking sort of like go through and just kind of constantly kind of giving them sort of like, okay, here's what you need to do, and on your own time, but they're reviewing the material and kind of keeping them engaged in the material.
Yeah, I sent out, like, basically about every other day I would send out an announcement, and in the priority 1 items, and I set up the system so that if they weren't there for 2 days in a row, they got an email. When they logged in, they saw, whoops, you haven't been here for a while. And I only had one student who, I still don't know what happened, just stopped communicating about halfway through the class. You know, I said, hey, there's still time, but you know, we need to go quick, and I never even got one email. And I was able to look in the system and see, hey, you know, last Wednesday was the last time this person even hit this page.
I see. So this is actually a way to sort of make sure they're kind of engaged in the course.
Yeah, and that's one thing you know, you kind of have to use the carrot and the stick at the same time, is my experience.
Because the most important thing for me is like I want to sign the reading, I want to make sure they're engaged in the reading, doing something, but you know, having a class quiz, you know, takes some time.
Right.
Seems like a good
I'm using it in my live classes now because I've already made the effort to create the quiz,
Right.
and therefore I can take from the test bank and tell them, hey, you got to go do this, so that it encourages them to do the reading. Because frankly, I have the same problem. They won't read unless I force them to, right?
Right, right. And
So.
it sounds like it's better to sort of do this sort of online thing where they're checking in, you're kind of like monitoring their involvement, engagement in class.
Exactly, and just like the video recordings, small chunks are better, right? If you, whether it's reading, whether it's, you know, quizzes, whatever, a larger number of smaller chunks, because it's online, is very workable where it wouldn't work in a live course. So yeah, I strongly suggest if you can break, you know, if it's a lecture, you know, maybe it's a 75-minute lecture, you know, break it down into 5 parts, right, if you can. If you are teaching a live course, one of the things that I did find helpful, though, was recording the live lectures, and then that gave me additional material to use.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any essay, exams or quizzes, like a problem solving?
So we had problems that weren't essay questions exactly, but what I did was there were certain concepts that essentially like writing a computer program, there are an infinite number of ways of doing it. So in those cases, yeah, I kind of used problem, there's one of them that's the multiple answer, for instance, and fill in the blanks kind of things. So I did use some of those things so that those mostly can still be automated. If you use the real essay version, then you have to go through on a student-by-student basis and grade those. So, I mean, the good news about engineering and math is generally I could fit it into one of the categories of fill in the blanks, multiple answers, and that sort of thing. But there are some limitations to what you can do to import. So, go ahead.
Were you using the early warning system?
Um,
Where you were tracking the grade center and last access?
Yeah, I did enable that. I don't know how well the students responded, but it seemed like
You're like one of few people I know who's using that. I've always thought that's such a great tool.
yeah. And,
It's getting better with this latest iteration of Blackboard. That's going to be, you know, with the retention center, they call it, it's going to be much easier.
the grade center in itself, well, to
Yeah.
put it mildly right now, it still sort of sucks.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it does look like they are adding things and making it better. So, but there are ways of getting the information out. So I have a separate gradebook, which is a shared Google Doc that my TAs can access. You can take the spreadsheet equivalent from Grade Center, put it in a regular spreadsheet on your computer, muck with it, and then upload it back to Gradebook too. So there are ways of kind of getting around the weaknesses in the Blackboard stuff. Okay, I'm about to turn into a pumpkin, so any other quick questions?